In this demonstration, I will be opening a silicone rubber mold. Here is the completed sculpture. Prior to the mold making process, it is out of terracotta red clay, stands about 7 to 8 inches in height, and about 10 to 12 inches in length. And as I mentioned before, the silicone mold process has already been completed. Here is the same sculpture with the first layer of Smooth On Rebound 25 1 to 2 coats prior to the second layer, which is the regular Silicone 1 thick coat. Remember that there are various ways to make molds and various ways to cut open molds. It all depends on the specific shape of the form and what material the form is made out of. So what I'm going to do right here is do a quick demonstration on how to open up a mold here that I have. I've already filed down the sections here to find the line so I can separate the mother mold. What I use is basically a regular rasp or file, even a carving tool to find the line. I then used hardwood wooden wedges. You only want to open up a mother mold like this in, at the maximum, maybe 3 to 4 wedges, because you don't want to destroy or ruin the mother mold line here, or what's called the fence line. And you can see if everything was made correctly, that should pop open pretty easily. Takes a little bit of work with the hammer on those wedges, but you can see how that mother mold will open up nicely. And you can see how the mother mold, all that does is serve as a weight for the rubber mold to secure into the proper position, because the rubber mold is flexible. So you can see how that opened up really nicely. Got a good clean fence line, and the fact that it's a handmade mold really allows the mold to register back together only in one position. Okay, so mother mold, very important to learn how to do before you learn how to do a rubber mold. Now after that, you can see here where I have a completed rubber mold, silicone rubber, 1 coat of your Smooth On silicone, which is a very, very more expensive silicone, and then on top of that we put the regular household #1 silicone caulking that you can buy anywhere. What you're going to need is a nice sharp box cutter and a magic marker or a Sharpie, because what you never want to do is completely cut a rubber mold in 2 pieces. You always want to keep a large section intact so it folds back and registers in the proper position. So with this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and just choose to cut it down this direction. So I'm just going to put a line here where I'm going to cut it. You can see how when we make that rubber mold, we add a column here, or a ridge. So when we cut, that large 1-inch ridge line will register back properly, so you get the least amount of misregistration possible. And you can see here I'm going to make a line somewhere, maybe about right there, just to kind of guide myself, to let myself know that when I slice and cut, I'm going to stop right there, right where I have that line. So I have a large portion, a good intact, so that will register and pop back nicely when I'm done. So very important to never cut your silicone mold in 2 sections. After that, then I'm going to slowly cut. Make sure not to cut yourself. Be careful with that razor, because silicone it gives, so you can put too much pressure and that razor can slide away. So I'm slowly taking this down. Continue you can see that as I'm cutting, slowly that ridge line, I'm going to eventually expose the clay that's underneath. So take your time. Processes like this, if you rush them, you can ruin the mold. And as you can see, I've already spent quite a bit of time on this mold and money, because silicone is not cheap. So as I slowly slice, you can see the clay form being exposed on the inside. Now you don't want to rip your silicone if you can help it. If you accidentally cut too far, or if you accidentally rip it, well, don't worry about it too much, because it is silicone and it will pop back into place. But the point of a rubber mold is so that you can have something to cast multiple times. If you do a correct silicone process, you can cast a sculpture thousands of times. Let's see. Again, I am stopping right at that line that I marked for myself. And I'm trying to open. You can also use the wedges to keep that silicone open to help you out. You can also have, of course, somebody else. Okay, and remember, the sculpture is destroyed at this point. So don't worry if the clay sculpture begins to fall apart on the interior, because, well, you've already made the mold. So got a pretty thick section here that I'm really going to have to dig through. I have some negative space here. You can see where it's underneath the arms, that negative space. This is a figure that's seating, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that section right there so I can be able to get that arm out, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Cut that where the silicone went in between the negative space of the arm. See how that's starting to separate nicely. Again, take your time. it's grabbing, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that arm, remove that clay to make it easier to remove the silicone. Right now, remember, the silicone mold is what is more important. Sculpture, the sculpture has already done what it's needed to do. And every mold is different. Every issue you're going to run into when you make a sculpture is going to be a new set of problems, a new set of shapes. And there are many multiple ways to make a mold using this technique. Okay. All right. So you can see how here is the raw sculpture form. So all of this has been destroyed because of the mold. Remove that out of the way. So what we have here is the interior or the negative space of a seated figure. Again, can't really see much because obviously it's the negative space. Okay, here you see how that's grabbing that leg. Doesn't really look like a leg, but I'm gonna go ahead and separate that right there. Remove that. Okay. Right here, I got a connector right there I'm gonna remove. And the reason why we make sure on the interior that we cut it is because, well, when we cast it in the wax that we need to cast, in order to cast this out of bronze, well, we need to be able to get that wax form out without it breaking. So we're always make sure that here's a little hand. That is the hand right there. You can see how I'm slowly going to just slice a little bit right there. Just so I can spread that open, keep opening it until I can remove that clay. That little slice part that I'm doing, that little cut, will help the wax separate as well. So silicone is fairly forgivable, meaning that as long as you cut it without taking silicone off, if you notice, no silicone has been cut off. It all has maintained its connection to the mold, right? No clay is in there anymore. Now, technically, I would wash this clean before I reassemble it, but for the sake of the demo, let's put this back together. Okay, you can see now here is the mold, and you see how that pops right back into place, as it should. Put that section of the mold on there. And we have now a mold and the negative space of a clay sculpture. Again, that will be cleaned. We would use some bungee straps or clamps to clamp it together, and honestly you can cast this out of a lot of different materials. We're going to use wax in order to take it into the lost wax process, but you could also use chocolate, cement, obviously plaster to make a positive cast, and I will probably do a test cast out of plaster like we always do, because a plaster test cast will clean that mold even better. Mother mold, silicone rubber mold, mother mold.